I remember my birth. What probably must have been maybe a day, but probably more hours before I was born into this lifetime. And what I really remember is being in this space of sort of, it's hard to describe in human terms too. I just want to make sure that everything that I'm talking about is really hard to put into human terms, because everything on the other side is not like it is here. It is and it isn't. So this is just like honestly like a fraction of what's happening simultaneously on the other side. So I'm going to try to put it into words as best as I can. But what I remember is sort of like this energetic space that I was in. It was what I remember most is color. So it was a spectrum of colors, of whites, of reds, of pinks. They were kind of swirling around me. I also noticed or remembered that it was really nice and it was warm and there was no pain, and it was just, if I was floating, it was just this effortless space to be in. Um, and and as I was finding myself in this space, I kind of was walking down this path, for a lack of a better word. So it was both a contextual path, so the idea of a human path, but then it also wasn't. I also felt like there were buildings to my left, and they also shapeshifted, so they were buildings, but then they weren't, sort of. So everything was sort of happening simultaneously. Um, I perceived those buildings to be sort of buildings where souls are um, thinking about what they're going to do next in their soul's journey. So when I say that, I mean, some of us will decide to incarnate on different planets. Some of us will be at a level where we're so evolved we don't have to necessarily. We can just choose to come to help out. Some of us will want to be on committees. So it was kind of like that building where souls were deciding what to do next. And I perceived myself having come from those buildings. And it was my walk, so to speak, from those buildings to the place I would be departing to the next step of my soul's journey. When I say walking, I wasn't in my body the way that I perceive myself now. I mean, I didn't have this body at all. The way that I might perceive myself is best understood as what many spiritual texts talk about in terms of the true self. So I perceived myself as a ball of energy. When I looked around me, I was literally light all around me. Um, and and I didn't perceive myself having a personality per se, although I was distinctly me. So who's speaking with you was that was on the other side, but I didn't have all this baggage of Christine as the personality, or the name. And as I was walking or floating down this path, I also perceived someone or something else next to me that I perceived as my mentor. It was a being that was so much more evolved and had so much more wisdom than I did. It felt like maybe he was um, in a similar space or a similar place that I had been at that moment beforehand, but he had had the choice of sort of stepping into the next role of mentoring souls and what to do next. So I can only say that he was a mentor. He was sort of larger and taller, on my right side. I perceived him as male. Now I want to be clear, over there, male and female aren't, as important as we make them here on planet Earth. It's really just more of a comfort zone of we can kind of switch in and out of these different energies, and it's just an energy. It's very neutral. And I guess in my case, I would just felt comfortable with perceiving him as a he. Um, and this being on my right was internally loving. I mean, everything was incredibly loving over on this other side. Very loving, very non-judgmental. As I was walking, we were telepathically communicating. And I was communicating with him, and at the same time as I was communicating with him, I was also being downloaded and communicating with something higher, which I perceived as God or God source, which was all around me, but came sort of from like the left upper side and was downloading me with all this wisdom and all this knowledge. And I kind of perceived myself as both the past, the future, and the present all at the same time. So all the lifetimes I had gone through, all the things I've learned in past lifetimes, all the wisdom of the universe, everything was sort of downloaded to me at that moment, while I was also discussing with my mentor at the time that, this lifetime that I had chosen and why I'd come, and or why I was going into this new lifetime. And then also kind of voicing a bit of reluctancy, because I knew that I had to come. I knew that there was something really important and that I had chosen to do this, but I didn't really want to go. And I want to make this clear because in past, interviews, I got like, feedback of like, well, great, here we are, we're being made to come down to earth. I want to make clear, like, this was a free will decision. I did come here, free will, but it was one where, like when you go to the gym, it's good for you because you're going to get slim and you're going to, get fit, and it's good for your health. But do you always go to the gym like screaming and yelling in excitement? Like, no, you don't. Sometimes you walk in there and you're like, really? The treadmill today again? I mean, I know it's good for me, but really? I know what this is like, And then sometimes you have a good workout, sometimes you don't. And it was exactly that way. So I was coming in, sure, with some kind of excitement because I knew it was good for me and my soul to come back. And I had clearly chosen it. But at the same time, I mean, this place is, it's your part and parcel of God. It's the greatest place to be in, You don't want to leave it. It's like you want to leave your bed in the morning because it's cozy and nice and comfy. No, you don't, right? But you still know you need to get up and get stuff done in the morning. So it was kind of like that. And I want to make that clear because I had a lot of questions asked around that. And I want to say this, we're not slaves. We're not made to go down there. Like, this is a free will decision, and all of us make it in a free will way because we know it's good for us to come. And we can go more into that later. But so that was that. But at the same time, I was reluctant, and I was like, do I really need to go? Like, can the way that and I can't tell you exactly why I was debating it, but it felt like my plan in some ways. I was kind of negotiating, but like, well, can I do something different to get there? Like taking the gym analogy, I guess I was kind of bartering and saying, well, what if I take this protein powder or this, slim powder that could I take that instead of going back into a lifetime? And he was sort of jokingly, saying, well, we discussed this, you need to come again, that like, this is really big. This is important for you. And so I was kind of like, I guess so, and then I was thinking to myself, well, if I keep him in conversation, maybe I can drag this out a little longer. I could stay back here a bit longer because it's just so beautiful out here. And I know what's coming because I had a sense that I had done this many, 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 many times. And I just was weary of what was going to come. So we walked to this sort of, as I describe it, it was like a helicopter hub. So it's kind of round and it was vortexy and it swirled. And we were right at the edge of it. And as I was standing there at the edge with my mentor to the right side, I could perceive other souls on the edge as well with their mentors. And they were kind of engaged in their telepathic communications. And I had a keen sense that those were souls that were also incarnating. Now, I don't know if they incarnated on planet Earth. I had a sense that there were many, many, many planets where you could incarnate. But they were also doing sort of the same thing as I was. So they were also departing, heaven or whatever you want to call the place I was in. And so I was standing there still trying to like kind of drag him out a little bit and be like, well, maybe I can get engaged. Yeah, I don't really want to go. So, kind of the last the pieces of the conversation that I remembered was like, well, but what if I need you? What if I forget? And what if I need you? And then he said, before he kind of pushed me because he knew that I wouldn't go by myself. I wouldn't jump by myself. He pushed me into the vortex. But before he pushed me, he was like, we're always with you. We're always with you. There's nothing to worry about. You just have to telepathically reach out because it never leaves you. You just forget that it leaves you. Just telepathically reach out to us and we will always help you. And I was like, okay, I can remember that. In that moment, he pushed me. And I was kind of like, like, why did he push me? And it was all lovingly, okay? None of this was like the ego piece of us that makes it anything. It was all lovingly. It was kind of like, okay, here we go. I guess he pushed me. Okay, I know he's my mentor. He knows what's best for me. So he pushed me down the tunnel. And then what I describe is like I fell backwards through the tunnel that many people describe in their near-death experiences. So the way that you can perceive it is like the near-death tunnel isn't just a one-way street, it's actually a two-way street. So I fell through it from the other side into life. But I also had a sense that when you return, you fall through that same tunnel back into, those realms. And there's different realms. It's not just the one that I came from. And so I was like kind of sucked into this tunnel. I fell and I fell and I fell. It was dark. And then there was a switchover place where I kind of switched over into the human realm. And that's when I slammed into my body. It was bright. I remember feeling pain in my body because I was taking a breath. I was thinking, like breathing was hard, breathing was heavy. I was thinking, here we go again. Now I'm in a body again. I have to do the whole thing again. Okay, whatever. And then I just completely fell asleep, like passed out. And my mom on the back end will tell you it kind of all fits together. Number one, I was 2 weeks late, and the doctors at the time were really worried. I was born in the late 80s in Switzerland, so it was a little bit different, right? And they started to be really worried that I was 2 weeks late, and they were like, "This baby better come, or else something might happen." So so makes sense that he would have pushed me, because who knows what would have happened with me? Maybe I would have been a stillbirth, or this lifetime would have been shit, right? So there was this immediacy that I also felt on the other side, that I really needed to go now, otherwise I would miss the train. And then also my mom will tell you that in that little nursery that they wheeled me into, and the next morning when she came to visit me to see how I was doing, I was like, there were maybe 30 babies, and they were all screaming and crying and upset about being on planet Earth. And I was like smack in the middle, not saying anything. I was like sleeping. And I pretty much slept my early childhood away. And I know I did that because I was just sort of like, in denial still that I was here. So that was that. I have some earlier memories then, as maybe like in my first year. So the very first one is right after my birth, where I was laying in my crib, and all these people were kind of standing around me, and these like cuddle animals, specifically this ball, was like held into my face, and it was just like Gucci Gucci goo, and like they were doing the like babbly boo. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, like I'm a fully thinking, like intelligent, like being in here. You don't need to talk to me like this. I can hear you very well. And then just closing my eyes again. And then the next memory I have was sort of like moments where I was just downloaded with different lifetimes that I had in the past, and everything that I'd chosen in this lifetime for the reasons of what happened in those lifetimes. And specifically, one thing I remember was thinking, oh, these are my parents now. I remember my parents from the most recent last lifetime. And then sort of having feelings about that. And then thinking, oh, interesting. Now my name is Christine, when my parents would say, oh, your name's Christine now. And they would say my maiden name, and I'd be like, interesting. And then thinking to myself, that's interesting that I'm called that now, when I was called something else, in another lifetime. And I think my other name was something like Lisa or something like that. And I remember as an early child also always thinking like, why can't I be called Lisa or Lena or something like that? And because I honor my parents, obviously, and they picked a beautiful name, but Christine wasn't my first choice when I was a child. And so that's pretty much the brunt of it. Around like year one, things just started mushing into my brain, and I just became the regular like mush sort of early childhood being that all of the people are. And I know there's a lot of skepticism out there where they're like, well, you can't possibly remember your birth because the brain isn't capable of it. And then I say, well, but this is more real to me than anything. I mean, I can't remember what I ate yesterday, and I remember this like it was 2 seconds ago. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same, right, that people say about NDEs, that people sometimes will question them. And then, yet again, people that have had the NDEs will say it seemed much more real than this lifetime is feeling right now. So, as I usually tend to say, is yeah, just take it as it is. And if you don't feel like you can trust it, then that's fine for the audience. But yeah, I don't really see a reason why we wouldn't believe that.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I agree.
it sounds to me that as a child, and tell me if I'm wrong in assuming that, but it sounds like as a child you were almost very grown up in your thinking, and you had so much information that usually we forget or is not available to us yet.
That is correct. Yes. I had, I would say, I don't know exactly how old I was, but very much, right after my birth. So I would maybe say up until my first birthday. I had many downloads, sort of kind of, the way that I saw it is like just images in front of my eyes of lifetimes where I flowed out of the lifetime and then have the lessons, like my deaths. I would see my deaths, and I even having the feeling of, in those lifetimes being afraid of the death, and then that death moment would come, and then I would be like, oh, it's different on the other side, because I would have like a certain belief system, and then that belief system was like, oh, it's totally different, and that was in different capacities. Um, I also had memories of, choosing certain lifetimes for specific reasons of, I guess what, like Asian cultures would call karma, of like, maybe I've done something in another lifetime that just had to be balanced out in this lifetime. And I had to learn the consequences and learn the lessons around it and then balance it back out. So I had all these memories of these lifetimes, and they were sort of being integrated into my human body and my human mind. And I think there was a specific reason for it, because it was important for this, my purpose being here right now. Yeah, that was really interesting. And also those memories are also more real than anything. And when I say memories there, I want to say that they're not like memories of, like I said, my lunch yesterday or what I did with auntie, so and so 5 years ago. They're more transparent. Like if you've ever meditated and you've had like this really clear moment, they're just like clarity. It's like very clear, very real information that I was like sort of interacting with in my first year of childhood. I also, when that ended, sort of that period, I remember one moment thinking, or kind of realizing, that I was this mush ball, that like now suddenly I had integrated with my body fully, and now I wasn't thinking this clearly anymore. And I remember sort of a frustration, but then like it like, you know, um, trickled away. And I was just like, okay, I guess this is what it is now. And then as I was growing up and my brain, grew up, that's when the memories started coming back, and I was sort of, like I was able to like integrate it again. But yeah, so there was also the switch point, from where I guess my soul in early childhood was integrating with my human self, and that was just the process of it. Yeah.
Right. So it wasn't that when you were an early child that you understood what past lives are and your purpose. Why did you have to come into this world? Because I could imagine that being a bit daunting as a child. You just want to play with people and just be silly. And then all of a sudden, like, you know about past lifetimes and you know things that most adults don't even know.
Yeah. No, I mean, I didn't, the concept of past lives or any of that wasn't clear to me. Honestly, for me as a child, it just was reality. Like it was just what it is. Like I couldn't put a name on it or whatever. I put names on it later on as I, try to sort of recover myself from depression and finding my purpose, because society had made me believe that all of this was just my imagination that was just a little bit bigger than other kids' imaginations. And and they really did me a disservice with that, because they, even though the veil, for some reason, the veil wasn't placed over me, society tried to put a veil over me and kind of fit me neatly in a box and say, do not share these memories. Do not even think this was real, because it couldn't have possibly been. You're crazy. And in that way, sort of, yeah, I mean, I was really like, okay, so if this wasn't real, then what am I here for? Because, obviously I was meant to remember this in order to really step into my purpose. Um, yeah, and then as an older child, I do remember sort of having imaginary friends. I had a cat that was a spirit cat, what I realize now, that kept visiting me, and I'd play with it, and all kinds of other sort of spirit friends that would come and visit me, beings at night that come and visit me, and I'd interact with them, and they download me with things, but obviously it just was, as a child, you don't have any intellectual understanding of what's happening. I put that intellectual understanding on it as I was looking at the data and researching it, and really was like, was this real or was it not? Can I put data on this? Then there must have been something to it. And if I can't put data on it, then okay, society was right. Maybe I'm just crazy and I just have a big imagination. But as I was researching it more and more, the puzzle pieces fell into place, and I was like, oh, it all makes sense. It all fits together. It's not, um as loosey-goosey or woo-woo as some people might make it. It's really, when you really start researching it, it all fits together. So yeah.
And tell me more about how you went about the research, because I think that's really interesting that most people do not research their own experiences a lot, but I'm guessing you went into deep research on what are pre-birth memories, why would you be able to see them? So I'm really curious, what did your research show?
Sure. So I have to tell a little bit of my own backstory here and how I got into this. So I've, like I said, you know, um, I had these different experiences throughout childhood, downloads, other experiences, obviously this memory that I would share with my parents and with others. And I was constantly it was, I didn't really find anybody who'd believe me and would say, oh yeah, this is real, or this might be real, or let's see if it's real, right? I grew up in a household that was not necessarily religious, but religious in its own right, because it believed in the science of things. And the science of the 90s would, even today, it's a dogma in itself. It's like, well, that can't be because your brain isn't, so this was just a dream. And that kind of got me into a phase in my, early teenage years, and then into my early 20s of, some depression, because I was like, well, everybody has something that they like to do, but I don't. What am I here for? And then I'd have like glimpses of memories and stuff, and that would light up my heart. And then I'd be like, no, 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 but everybody says this is not real. So I'm just gonna, go down the real path and really be the real person. And then something happened in my early 20s where a childhood friend of mine, he was younger than me, and my mom, is very good friends with his mom, and I've known him even when he was in the womb. So I've known him since he was born and a baby, and I was like 3 years old. We played together, and he was diagnosed with cancer very tragically and died very quickly after, in his early 20s. And I was, my own early 20s, and it really shocked me because I was so close to him and I had seen him, throughout my life. And that was really my first real encounter with death in that way. And that sort of prompted me, like, well, I wonder what happens after death. Is this memory that I have, this pre-birth memory, it's not a near-death experience, but is it related to that? Could it be the other bookend? Because if it is the other bookend, then this was real. And that's really when I started looking up pre-birth memories. Now, I couldn't find anything about pre-birth memories, just due to the fact that science still believes that we cannot possibly remember our birth. But what I could find was many, many anecdotal accounts of near-death experiences. And so I started getting pretty much reading everything that was out there on near-death experiences, on incarnation, reincarnation, and all of that, you know, from scientific people. So, you know, I believe there's somebody in the University of Virginia, some people that really are collecting data about this. It's not just some, you know, person who had a meditation and experienced something. And as I was looking at that, I was like, wow, there's something to this, because everything that they describe, you know, and it's like what I was sharing earlier, this realness of like, this was more real than anything. The like, this is sticking with you. You don't remember, like, you don't forget this. All those like things, I had too, right? Like that was exactly it. Then the tunnel. I'm like, well, I went through the tunnel too. I just fell backwards, right? So I had everything just on the other side, you know, kind of backwards. Um, and so that's when I was like, okay, so there's something to this. And I also think that it's really, it brought me a lot of hope. So all of a sudden, you know, I kind of came out of this depression of like, well, what am I here for? I don't know what my purpose is. Why even being here? I mean, life was, you know, suffering to me. I was constantly sick because I didn't know what my purpose was. So I was suffering in my body too. I was medicating with alcohol, you know, all of this. And then I found this information and I'm like, wow, there's something more to this. Like I'm here for a purpose. Like I created all this. There's a plan here that the experience I had was real. So that's really where you know, I got more and more into the research. And I'm like, well, you know what? Like if I'm gonna go down this road, this is really my passion, then I want to get a degree in it. And if there's something to it and I can get a degree in it and I can sort of help further the research in consciousness and then also help people heal from it, because this is powerful information, then that's where I need to be. And the more I was going down that path and researching, and I, you know, I decided to ditch my PhD in art history, as interesting as it was. But, you know, I was like, this is not where my passion, this is not what I could read about for hours and hours at night. And I decided to find a PhD that was on transpersonal psychology, one of the only ones in the country, and do that. And that's what I got my degree in. And the more I studied it, the more my skeptical mind was satisfied, because I found data on it. Like I found it's anecdotal data, right? Because it's not measurable yet. But I think that science is also evolving, and evolving in a way where we very soon are going to have ways to really kind of like, you know, quantify this and say, oh, wow, maybe there is something to this. I think this is the next, and this is part of this next big revolution in science, I think, is consciousness, where because we still don't know where consciousness actually comes from, right? There's different theories, but I think people just assume it's evidence that it does come from the brain. Nobody knows where it really originates in the brain. And there's the theory that maybe it doesn't originate in the brain. Maybe the brain is just a receiver, like like a radio receiver, and like a radio receiver, we switch it to different frequencies. And so our soul, our consciousness is the frequency that's sort of in the radio receiver, which makes so much more sense, you know, also given near-death experiences, pre-birth experiences, any kind of psychic experiences. That theory makes much more sense, but we can't prove it because we can't quantify. It's all anecdotal, right? So that's what I can say about that. I mean, I could talk for hours about this stuff, as you can tell. Very
Oh,
passionate about.
I would love to. And I especially love that science is sort of catching up with, because indeed we have like a lot of anecdotal accounts, but I think more and more people are trying to mush those together and mesh them into science, actually, and into coherent articles and publications, which will bring everything a bit further along, because it will help us all. I think we all go through basically the same things, just some of us are more aware of it than others.
I agree. And I think also that there was a stigma around it, you know, from the Enlightenment period of like any of this religious or spiritual stuff is nothing, right? But we all have these experiences. And I was actually sitting in a smaller circle of women the other day, and we're all, you know, sort of studying energetics and energy healing and shamanism, and one was mentioning, she was like, it's really interesting how all of us have always had sort of a hunch that we had a certain purpose, that there was something grander. We all sort of had these beings that were with us in childhood. We all have, these experiences, but we're all keeping shush, shush, shush about it because it's woo-woo. I might be crazy. And I think, but now I think people are becoming more aware that, wow, we're all having this, and there must be something to it. Then it's not as crazy as we're making it. And I think this is really important also when we're talking about healing our mental health, because I think it was Viktor Frankl who was sort of my hero and my mentor in spirit, I want to say, who said that when we find our purpose and when we find what we came here to do, which is uniquely ours, nobody has the same purpose, just like nobody has the same like fingerprint, right? But when we find that, then all depression will lift, and suddenly we will become totally healthy, and and like things will just switch around. You won't need meds or anything like that. And by the way, I think medications and integrative mental health practices are vital, but I also think there's something to be said about being able to find what you need as a way of healing yourself and of getting yourself out of that fog, because everything suddenly becomes clear and wonderful. When you find your passion, then life becomes wonderful. So yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I was actually talking earlier today about, being in a career or at a job where it just feels like you're stuck and it just doesn't feel good. And the thing is, it becomes more difficult day by day. And it's not necessarily a task-related difficulty, but it's more like an emotional difficulty. Like when you do something that's just draining because you're not meant to be doing that. And the more you stay at that, the more draining it becomes, the less energy you have for anything else. It just becomes harder, even though the work itself doesn't get harder.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that that's also by design. And I think that more and more people are experiencing it also by design, because consciousness is shifting and changing, and we're not meant to be in these confining, roles where we're just playing what society says us, get a stable job, make your money, doesn't matter what it is, right? Like, yes, that's all good. I think that we need to have embodied spirituality in a sense that we do need to make a living. We do need money. We do need to eat. That's that, we can't, I mean, if it works for you, sure, live in a hut somewhere out there and have a hippy dippy life, right? But I prefer my house and, and the comfort of heat and all of that. But at the same time, I also think it's a confining idea that we can't make money with what we're passionate about. I actually think that what our heart calls for is exactly what we can make money with. It's exactly what we're meant to make money with. And and it's just a matter of sort of just learning some truths, right? Like, number one, we like self-confine and self-restrict ourselves, and number two, we are free will beings. That's the beauty of it. We're free will beings made in the image of creator, which all spiritual, texts tell you in one way or another. And so we're eternally powerful to create whatever we want, right? And when we recognize that, then life actually becomes joyful, which is the sole purpose we all share, is having joy in this life. So when I came here, and I said, oh, life is hard, right? It's also a little bit of like the remembrance of harder lives I had, because I through a lot of stuff. And don't get me wrong, my life is still hard. I also get people writing me, well, I wish I was in the mindset that you were in, eternally peaceful. I'm not floating on a cloud, like singing Om all day long and pooping rainbows. Like, my life is challenging in different ways too. I'm a mom of two small kids and all of that. I'm going through it as well. But I think it makes it easier when I know, oh, okay, I chose this. Okay, I can take a deep breath. I have my tools. I have things that work for me. Oh, I need to take a break. Let me take a break, right? It makes it easier when you can contextualize it and understand it, like the bigger picture. not just this like, oh, I'm in this life and oh, and one day I'm gonna die and blah, 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 you know, end of story. Like, no. So yeah,
No,
totally agree.
exactly. I could not agree with you more. I think it's so true. And I think we all have our different challenges. I don't think there's anybody that just lives a perfect life and is just perfectly blissful all the time, because that's not what life is. And we also get some of those comments that, oh, I wish I were you. I wish I had that freedom to do what you do. But we also need to realize that even when people talk about something that's maybe a bit inspirational, maybe spiritual, it doesn't mean that they're absolved of ever getting angry in traffic or having challenges as well. I think everybody gets angry at times. Everybody gets a bit sad at times. I get sad once a month on the minute. Like I can tell you when it is. Um, but I just know that's emotions. That's normal, and I know that I will snap back out of it. And I just know not to make rash decisions in those times. So we all
Yeah.
have, that's the humanity about us. We go through different phases and emotions. I just think some of us are a bit better at managing those times and understanding them for what they are than others, and seeing, as you said, the big picture. Because I think seeing the big picture can give a piece of hope and a piece of clarity when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're in the midst of those challenges.
I completely agree. And I think that's a really good bridge over to psychospirituality, and this idea of like the next force, therapy. And there's two big, uh, uh, or like ideas that I like to like stress with all of the people, I guess, is the idea of spiritual narcissism as well as the idea of spiritual bypassing, right? And like the idea of spiritual narcissism really is that, wow, now I found the spiritual path. Now I need to be floating around on a cloud, and I know the truths and I tell everybody else what the truths are. And I'm never angry and I'm always, and oh my God, I was just angry, but I'm meditating like nothing else. Can I still be angry? And it's just like, yes, right? Like, and then the spiritual bypassing piece is exactly that. It's like, well, just because you're on the spiritual path doesn't mean you're not going to feel any emotions anymore. You're still a human being, right? But you're going to see the emotions for what they are. They're teachers and they're evolving you, and they're literally carving the diamond out of you, of recognizing who you truly are. Emotions are the reason, and relationships are the reason why we incarnate here, because they help us understand what we're not. And when we understand what we're not, fear, jealousy, anger, all of these things, sadness, then we can understand, well, then I'm probably the opposite. So that must mean I'm unconditional love, made in the creator. Oh, I am meant to be happy. Oh, I am all these like beautiful things. But we won't understand that unless we had the opposite, the darker side of the emotions experience. And so when we can see that, then we can live embodied spirituality. I get angry all the time, okay? But when I get angry, I say, oh, wow, I'm angry. Why am I angry? Oh, well, the anger is actually sadness. Why am I sad? Oh, well, my father passed away 6 months ago. That's why I'm sad, right? And just because I know what's on the other side, I still grieve my dad and I miss him, and that's okay. But I can be with these emotions in a conscious way versus just pushing them aside and saying, I don't want to feel them, right? Spiritual bypassing. And now I'm going to meditate, or regular bypassing. And now I'm going to smoke, or now I'm going to drink, or now I'm going to do this drug because I don't want to feel any of this. This is too uncomfortable, right? Feeling it is also courageous. So, yeah, totally agree with that.
Yeah, that's something that I've learned. Took me 34 years. So it was quite a recent lesson, I have to say, that you have to feel your feelings. Easy one, but it took me a little while to get there. And also, what I realized for myself personally is when you feel your feelings, they sort of go away after a while because you just
They lose their
process
power.
them. Yeah.
Correct. And that's why they say you got to feel it to heal it. You have to feel it to heal it. I had a very powerful experience. When was that? That was 9 years ago. I went through a huge heartbreak with somebody I really thought I was going to marry. It was a really, really bad, traumatic breakup for me. And I was kind of set back, I was 30, I was set back in my parents' house, and I was meditating on it because I was just like restless, and I had this pain in my heart. And then my meditation teacher at the time was like, you got to sit with the feelings. You have to feel it, you know? And so I was sitting with it, and every day as I was sitting with it, something magical happened. It was like this onion, and like this layer, like layers of emotions peeled away. At first there was anger, and then there was pride and shame and all of these things. And then underneath it, there was sadness. And when I had gotten to the sadness, something magical happened where it just switched, and suddenly I was just grateful and peaceful and happy. And I was just like, oh, cool, now it's gone. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it still took me a couple of years to get over it, it wasn't like a magical, but I had this experience of like, oh wow, all these emotions are sort of layers of this onion. Really, I took that with me because, even now that I'm married happily and all of these things, other things happened to me. Like I said, my father passed away, and that was, I had a really rough, past 9 months. And, and just seeing like, wow, why am I so angry? Oh, I'm angry because I'm really sad. There's sadness underneath it. So what do I need to do? Do I need to go to the bathroom and cry for a moment before I come out and I collect myself? Okay, let me allow myself to do that. There's also a lot to be said about self-compassion and and seeing it, because that inner child, we never lose it. We never lose it. I would arguably say it's actually that spiritual piece that comes into this lifetime and it leaves. And I think the blessed are the people that have not lost their inner child and are fully connected with them, because society makes you lose it. And, all these sayings of like, well, grow up, don't be like that. I even had it the other day. I bought my daughter these like little Crocs with rainbows and glitter and whatever. And I'm like, wow, I would have really liked those as a child. And then for a moment, I contemplated buying the same ones for me. And I'm like, I'm gonna be 37. Really, like maybe I don't buy them. And I didn't buy those, but then, my inner child kicked it back in and was like, well, maybe you buy the glittery ones, because you could still, walk around in the glitter Crocs. And yes, people might judge you and say, well, what's going on with her? She looks like a child, but who cares what other people think? That's their problems, right? So I decided to buy the glitter Crocs, and now my daughter and I are sort of walking around in the same kind of Crocs, and it makes me happy, right? It makes my inner child happy. So yeah.
That's so important. And I love that you shared this story, because I think that's exactly what we should be doing. I think when we're faced with a choice like this, like, why not just make ourselves happy? Because people are going to say things regardless whether we wear the Crocs or we wear the, I don't know, black boots or whatever it is. Nothing is perfect to everybody, right? But if it makes us happy, then why would it be wrong to wear the glitter Crocs?
I completely agree with that. And I think we're coming to like judgment there, right? And like, what
Mm.
is judgment, right? And are we going to are we letting other people like judgment reflect on us, right? I think the best thing that I've ever learned, it was also a shamanic Toltec teaching, was take nothing personally, because nothing actually has anything to do with you, right? So judgment from other people has everything to do with them and nothing to do with me or you or anybody, right? It's really their own reflection of what they're unhappy with themselves and how they're self-judging. And by judging others, it makes them feel better about themselves, but there's a lot of shadow work going on with them. So when we can recognize it as that, it's just like, I'm really sorry you have to judge me, like there must be pain and other things going on, but I'm quite happy walking around my glitter Crocs and, putting unicorn pins in my hair or whatever, because this makes me happy, and I'm not judging myself, and I like to walk around like this. So I think not taking things personally and not making assumptions about what other people think is a really good way. Although I also want to say there's a lot of idea about concept, like in theory, this sounds all easy and, easy to do, but the practice of it obviously is very hard and takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of go around, and, and sometimes you need a guide, sometimes you need a therapist or somebody to like hold your hand and walk you through it. So I also don't want to make this being like, duh, why aren't you doing it? Well, you're not doing it because you're understanding it intellectually, but living it embodied is a totally different, you know, course. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And actually, I want to talk about past lives, but this is so interesting on judgment that I just want to follow it up with a question. So, say somebody were to see you in your Crocs because you've given this example and say, "Oh my God, Christine, like, why would you be wearing those Crocs? Like, they're so like made for children, and you're so not a child." So there's clear judgment, and there's not necessarily offensive, but it's not a kind thing to say to you by any means. What would be the right response for such a statement?
I think the right response, there's two kinds of responses that it could come from. Number one would be the ego respond. I would argue that 99.9% would respond from ego. And they'd be like, well, who are you to tell me that I cannot wear Crocs? I like Crocs. So, you must be having problems, whatever. But that response comes from a fear place, from a place where we feel like we're being attacked. So we're not feeling safe. So our ego feels like they need to keep us safe. So we're going to respond, right? We're going to react. The better place to come from is to notice that that's going on, because it's going to come up for all of us. The ego is going to always try to jump and protect us. And then be like, okay, ego, thank you for protecting me. Maybe I can go within and not respond from that ego place. And that takes a couple of breaths. And sometimes it takes just like a shrug and a removal, and then a proactive response at a later date. And the proactive response would be sitting with our heart and being like, well, why would they say that? I don't know. I can't make assumptions. I could ask them, why are you saying this? But like, how does it make me feel, right? Like, how do I feel about wearing the Crocs? It makes me feel loving, and it makes me happy. And when I see them glitter, it reminds me of my childhood, and or maybe a pair of shoes my grandma bought me. I was really excited about when I was 5 or whatever. It makes me happy. So then you just say, okay, so that's that. And why they talk to me about this is really their thing, right? So the best way, or the most loving way, if we don't have anything kind to say, we say nothing at all, right? And then at a later point, we can come back and say, hey, I've noticed you said that. I wonder why you had this response to the Crocs, because it makes me feel really happy. I don't think this is childish, right? But I'm curious to know why you said it so I can better understand it. So it's all about, number one, not taking it personally, right? Not letting your ego jump at it and react, because that usually creates chaos. But kind of staying in the non-reactive space of working out with yourself and saying, well, why am I taking it personally? That must be has something to do with me, not with them. There's a inner wound in me that needs to be healed. And then when I've looked at that, to kind of, if I'm interested in it, engage in a loving conversation and say, hey, this is how this made me feel. I'd really like to know what's going on there. Like, why did you say that, sort of thing, right? So I would say, being proactive versus being reactive is always the better way. So coming from love versus from fear, to put it in woo-woo terms.
I love that. So difficult to put into practice, but I think that's really good advice, and I know exactly the situation where I will be practicing it in. So
Yeah,
thank you for sharing that.
great.
I know that we've gone a bit over our allotted time, but I wanted to ask you one more question, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
Because you mentioned having memories of your past lives, and I don't think we have enough time to go into everything right now, but is there anything in particular that stayed with you and that's really important from your past lives to who you are now and what your purpose is in this life?
Yes, I had several past life memories. I think several things that came up were important. Let me see where to start. So I had one past life I remembered where I did take my own life. And I think it was important to see why I committed suicide in that lifetime, because I regretted it as a soul on the other side. And I actually had somebody talk to me about that and ask me questions about it. I regretted it. I did it thinking that I would get relief from it. And then I was on the other side and thinking, damn, I shouldn't have done this. Not because anybody was judging me over there. They were internally loving, but I had cut something short and I started realizing that, it wasn't, I couldn't get out of it. It's like, in order to graduate first grade and go on to second grade, or in order to graduate high school and go on to college, if you want to be a doctor, you have to graduate it. There's no other way around it. You can't forge it. And it's the same thing, when we're in a really hard lifetime, we chose this lifetime. I know it's hard to hear for some people, but we chose it, and there's lessons in it. And we're meant to reach out to our support. We're not alone, right? And in that lifetime, I wasn't able to reach out to my support. I was so stuck in my own, things. And obviously, depression can be really hard. I don't want to diminish this, okay? It can be really hard. And there's always support there, right? So I had killed myself. And I remember being in this like limbo space at first that I couldn't get out of. That was really hard. And then finally I got out of it. And there's real regret in thinking back then, like, I'm never going to do this again. And this was important for me because I had, not active suicidal ideation, but I had times in my life where I was like, maybe I could just, just end it. And I'm glad that, I had this memory, because I'm like, well, there was this memory though, that wasn't good. And then I read up on it and it confirmed it, everything I read in different books. And I was like, okay, that's not a choice. That's not a choice. I'm doing something different. Right. And that's really what got me in the healing, and then once I started finding my purpose, it really went away entirely. But that was a really important one. I also had a memory of my recent, not my current birth parents, but the parents that birthed me in the last lifetime that I very, very much loved, but they were sort of poor and they couldn't really offer me anything. And I died as a child, I believe, because my mom really grieved me in that lifetime very, very badly. And my dad too. And I remember being in like spirit world and feeling really bad for them. And but they were sort of, they were coming from a poor background. And in this lifetime, not that I was super rich or anything like that as a child, but I know I chose my parents because they provided me with a certain financial background that would give me the steps to become a doctor, right? Without my parents, I wouldn't have been able to get the education. Without my European background, I wouldn't have been able to get the education. I needed this education in order to fulfill my purpose in the way that I am now. So I chose that very consciously, that background. And there's many other lifetimes. I mean, one where, I learned, I remember where I learned about that I had chosen certain disabilities in my body because I'd made fun of those in a past life. And so I was balancing the scales out and really having the backside of the experience of like, oh, wow, that really doesn't feel great when you're making fun of people like that, when they have, and feeling very lonely. And that was also something that I remembered. And I'm really keen. I actually came into my life here with an ability and a gift to be able to see everything from a 360-degree viewpoint. I can really understand everybody's point of view, which sometimes is to my detriment because it makes me really soft. And I'm like, oh man, I really understand you. And, I really understand the other side too. But I think it's important to also be able to step into the bigger picture and be like, okay, there's a coin to everything, right? And not to really, remind myself to be kind to people and to be kind to people's experiences, because everybody experiences life in different shades, but that doesn't mean that they make it any less traumatic or difficult, or the suffering is any less than anybody else. So, yeah.
Oh, so true. And so good to understand and to put it in perspective, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Christine, how can people connect with you and with your work?
So you can connect with me best way through the internet, the World Wide Web. My website is very simple. It's drchristine.com. There's my email there. You can contact me there as well. I have my services there. You can connect and interact with my social media, which I'm building out a little bit, and things like that. So that's probably the best way to get in touch with me at this point.